Hello dear friends, thank you for being with me today. I'm so delighted that you're here. I have been struggling all day to put the camera on because we are having such a heat wave here. My word, it's over 30 degrees and has been probably for the last 6 or 7 days. So I'm going to briefly explain to you what I'm going to do in terms of talking, and then I'll put on some music because the process is fairly simple. And yeah, you should be able to follow along if I put on some music, and then I'll come back at the end and just tell you about the finishing steps. So let's start. Okay, so I have a tuna tin here that I have painted with white acrylic paint. You'll see it's not evenly coated. That doesn't matter. I just want to cover the color of the metal so that I can work on the tin, and the color of my napkin that I'm going to be using will show through properly. So napkins, when you've removed the backing pliers, are fairly transparent, like this one you'll see. And if I've got it up against a white background, it'll pop up nicely. But if I have to put it over a colored background, you'll see that that color shines through. Hence the reason why I have painted this. So I've got one of those. I'm going to be using this as a planter for a little bit later. This little tray has just got a guinea fowl feather on. I love it. I inherited it from my aunt when she died. It's a silly little thing that just reminds me of home. We had lots of guinea fowl in Cape Town. Anyway, that's just to put my brush on. I've got a couple of options for napkins to use. So I essentially want to decorate just around the ridge here. I've got a really lovely succulent that I want to put in, an Ephemera. So a couple of my options would be maybe to use a border like that, which would give me a very plain background with a little bit of interest. And then obviously that wouldn't include the roses, so I'd be able to use that for another project. I could use something like one of these stripes. I could use something fun and funky like this black and white, and this is probably one of my favorite serviettes or napkins. I could separate some of these images and do a selection of birds. Not my choice at the moment though, because of the succulent. I don't feel that these kind of cottagey birds would go too well with that, so that one's going to be a no for me. I could use something like one of these leaves as well, but again, because the succulent has particular shaped leaves and these don't tie up, that one's no. So the options that I'm left with now are these three. And I think because my succulent has such nice soft delicate colors, I'm probably going to go with this one that just has the stripes. Now if I open this napkin out, you'll notice that it has a few different colors running through it. And if I was to just use, let me just put it this way, if I was just to use this stripe along here, I'd get mostly a green border. If I use this stripe along here, I'd get a variety of different colors with blue running through it. If I use this one, I would get the yellows with different colors, and this one I would get the lilacs. So I think I'm going to go with the one that has the blue, just because I want a bit of a contrast. My aim is just to stick from this little lip here down to the bottom and maybe slightly underneath. I'm not planning on covering the whole of the underneath surface, but in order to get my stripe onto that, I would need to position it so that it's more or less in the middle of that band. Otherwise I could do it quite close to the top and then I'd get a lot of white at the bottom. I suppose that's probably going to be a little bit easier because then I've got a line to follow. Alright, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just take this strip of napkin and separate it from the rest. I'm just going to cut it out. I'm going to cut it through the center here, just so that I've got a bit of play. And then most of you will know, I'm sure, that if you've worked with napkins before, that they've normally got different backing papers to them known as ply. Some are 2-ply and some are 3-ply, and this one, let's see, we've got 2-ply. So when I've come out just with this, where's that another one on here? Sometimes it's difficult to tell initially, it can be a bit deceptive, but you'll notice when you start sticking that the paper tends to wrinkle quite a lot if you've actually got extra. No, I think that's just, yep, that's it. Right, so let's have a look at this now and see if I line this stripe up just underneath the lip of the tin. I will have that little bit to the bottom that will give me a bit underneath. Yes, I quite like that. Right, so I'm going to now mark out the center of my napkin. There should probably be a fold, but sometimes it's not always in the center. Mine's a little bit off. So I'm just going to mark that with my fingers, and I'm going to start in the center. Now the reason why I'm starting in the center is so that when you come to lay this, if you had to start on one side and it started going skew, it's going to be really difficult to join it up at the other side. But if you start in the middle, you'll find it a whole lot easier to join up. Let's see how we're going to do color wise. Yeah, we should actually do that quite nicely with the color overlap there. Right, so let's get out our matte medium, my little brush. I'm going to apply the matte medium through the napkin, because the napkin is just really a thin layer of paper, and it will glue down quite quickly. And my preferred medium at this stage is the matte medium, because it's not going to be as sticky as if you were working with Mod Podge. But you could use Mod Podge, you could use one of these other products that they have for sticking things down. So you'll notice now that I've smoothed this out a little bit on the napkin. I've kept my lip in place here, and I am just going to dip my brush in and make sure that my brush always has a generous coating of matte medium on it. You don't want your brush to be dry at all. You might find that you pick up a little wrinkle here and there. Don't sweat about it. It never looks as bad as it is when it is dry. So I'm going to be working in two directions, trying to keep my fingers in the middle of the tin so I don't touch the napkin itself, and I should actually get through this quite quickly. While you're working, you want to make sure that you are just smoothing out any little air bubbles that might be underneath the surface, and make sure that your brush is continuously replenished with some of the matte medium so that you don't stick your bristles through. It can happen so quickly. Very light touch when you're doing this as well. You don't want to be heavy-handed, because that will mean that you're going to poke your fingers through. So you'll notice that I'm brushing in both directions and using my bristles just to get a nice sort of neat, crisp edge up at the top. Make sure that these edges where it's going to join in the middle are nice and sealed, and just for appearance's sake, I'm just going to gently brush this over. It's going to pleat and fold as I do it, but that's okay because it's going underneath. It's only pleating and folding because it's going over a curved surface, and that's quite normal. For those of you that know about sewing, you know that this will happen if you're going to put in a collar or a sleeve into a garment. Alright, so I'm just gently moistening the paper enough so that it will just tuck under the edge, which means that it looks neat as a finished product. And these would make lovely little containers for sweets. You could make them and put candles in them. Nice for things for market day, if your kids do that at your school. My kids always had to have market or entrepreneurial day where they had to show how they would make some money from a little bit of startup capital. It was always quite fun to see what ideas they came up with. Right, so just continuing all the way around, making sure we keep our edge as neat as possible. Right, so I've got to the overlap section here, and I'm just going to snip through the middle of this block, because it's a light block, so that I can actually join the two together. And you probably won't notice much of the join at all. Right, so I'm just going to tuck these last little pieces over. And you'll find that your decoupage is pretty forgiving as you work with it. As it starts to dry, everything that you think was imperfect as you worked just doesn't look like that when it's dry at all. Even when you're working with pictures, you know, quite often when I was teaching decoupage back home in South Africa, we used to cut out multiple pictures from a magazine, and I know that I did a tray with cabbages on. In fact, I did more than one of them, but I stuck about 40 different pictures, one on top of the other. but by the time we'd glued them down and done a few coats of Mod Podge over it, you couldn't actually notice that they weren't anything other than a single picture, and it really looked stunning. So making sure at this particular point that I'm getting out any air bubbles that there might be, I need to make sure that this is firmly in contact with the surface underneath, and I'm making sure all the time that I am just tucking the edges in neatly, smoothing out any excess matte medium that I might have as I go around. Right, using my hand just to rotate this round and round. There we go. Just slightly go down so that I don't have any stripes on this. I think these colors are going to work really nicely with the plant that I have in mind. Right, so in order to be able to do this little turnover of the lip, I'm just going to rest it on my little ceramic saucer, and again just taking some of my matte medium. I'm just doing exactly the same as just moistening the napkin so that I can just turn it over. Just like that. This has got two layers joining together, so I'll just put some between them. You could at this point, if you wanted to, cut this off, but it just seems like a natural end to a napkin. If you were going to cut the edges off, I would wait until everything is completely dry, and then I would come in with a pair of sharp scissors. Okay, just tuck it down, almost folding it over gently. You don't want to use your fingers because it's all going to start lifting then. So I'm happy with that now, and I'm going to leave this to dry completely. I will need to seal it with a varnish so that I can put a plant in it. You'll notice that this particular tin doesn't have drainage holes at the bottom, and that is absolutely fine because I'm putting a succulent in. As one of my colleagues calls them alpines. I don't quite know why, because an alpine to me is a very different kind of a plant, but I could be wrong that you know them as alpines in the UK. That's absolutely fine. Anyway, they don't need much water. They literally need a couple of drops every few days. You know, maybe once a week you need to just give them a little bit of water. So I'll come back and show you how we do the varnishing a little bit later on. Now, to seal my container, I'm going to use some hard varnish. This is a varnish I got in South Africa. It's a liquid varnish. What you don't want to do is to actually shake this, because if you shake it, you're going to get air bubbles, and that's going to be problematic. They're quite hard to get rid of. So I'm going to just gently dip my brush in. I've got one little edge on the inside that hasn't glued down nicely, and I'm just going to use the varnish to do that as I'm working. So I'm going to varnish over the painted area here as well. Just want a nice thin coating. And this is something that you would be able to use, this particular hard varnish. I could use it on coasters, on placemats and things. I'm sure you would get a nice one in whichever country you're in. I know in the UK they've got a whole variety of varnishes that you can use, but you want something that's just going to be waterproof, so it doesn't have to be a hard varnish. It could be just a deco varnish. Or if you don't have any varnishes available to you, you can use hairspray as a sealant. It won't be obviously as durable as the others, but if you're just doing quick things, maybe for a market day or for a one-off event, it's not really going to make much difference. This is a matte varnish, so it is actually rather nice. It's not going to be shiny when I put the succulent in. And I just want to make sure that I cover all the way around the edges. Once I've gone all the way around in a circular motion, I'm going to then just brush it from the top down to the bottom. What I'm doing by this is just to make sure that I haven't missed any spots. It also helps where you've actually got varnish laying in a puddle somewhere to be able to smooth that out. And then I will once more go round in a circular motion, and that way I'll be pretty certain that I've covered virtually everywhere without missing any spots. This feels just a little bit dry in this section here. Right, so I'm just going to go over this again, going in a circular motion. Love the changing colours of this, and I think with the succulent in it's going to be rather fresh. Right, so I'm going to just rest this down on my ceramic container, just because it won't stick. You could do it on a piece of plastic if you wish to, or an old piece of laminate. So I'm going to use my varnish just to stick down that little section that didn't glue properly, and I'm going to seal the napkin on the inside, and then just wait for this to dry. So here's my lovely little succulent that I've now put in my container. It's called an Ephemera, and I propagated this from a single leaf. It's really easy to do, and let me show you what you would need. If you just simply take one of these outer leaves, hold your plant and just give it a gentle tug, it will come adrift. And if you put that tiny little edge just very loosely under the soil in a pot, it will propagate into another little plant. What I've also done with this is I've just taken some baker's twine, which is this lovely grey, and I wrapped it just around the edges here. Don't know if you can see that, just to finish it off. So I hope you enjoy this little project. I've even got a new little shoot coming up here on the side, another little baby plant, because they do grow quite quickly. Anyway, I hope that you've enjoyed this project. I hope that you'll have fun making some of these containers. Just lovely to be able to share plants that you have extra of in your garden with somebody without giving them a tacky plastic pot, or even just for a gift for a friend. Thanks for joining me, and if you've enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Please consider subscribing to my channel, and don't forget to put the notifications on. And if you've really liked it, you may help this video too. That helps my channel grow. Thanks so much. Bye for now.